You're in frame, actually.
I am.
It's just, yeah, it's just squared.
Okay,
It's just
sorry.
squared.
Small frame, our version of it. So my name is Jay Eckert, and I run the Upstate Carolina Linux Users Group. Tonight we've got Pat Geier.
Pat Geier, yes.
Geier from Suse, and he and his cohorts are going to be talking about Rancher tonight. And thank you, Ben, for recording tonight. Ben, of course, with the Columbia Linux Users Group. And I guess, Pat, take it away.
Thanks, Chase. Good to meet everyone. My name is Pat. I live in Charleston. I'm an executive for Suse. I handle pretty much a lot of the larger companies here in South Carolina, among others. One of them is Purpose Financial, Dance America, Brian's with. So thank you, Brian, for helping get this set up. And I brought Dwain Sims with me. He will be presenting Rancher. He will also go through a little brief area of Edge and New Vector, just a little bit, just to talk about it. Then Brian will discuss how they're using Rancher at Purpose Financial. And then my colleague here, Colin, he is with Crumware out of Columbia, and he is one of our partners. So he will go ahead and finish up, and then I will come back and we'll do a Q&A and then wrap it up from there. So hand it over to Dwain.
Thank y'all for coming up. Really appreciate it.
Certainly.
Yeah, Dwain Sims. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm originally from the other Charleston, near Charleston, West Virginia. So that's where I'm actually originally from. But have been with Suse for around 4.5 years, and have had a pretty interesting ride here. But also have some ties back into Columbia, especially. I used to work for Steel Eye Technology, which was spun out of NCR there in West Columbia. So I know that area very well. I probably made, I'm going to guess, at least 100 trips to Columbia over the time that I was working there. So I know I know that area pretty darn well. So and I miss going there, because I used to go there a lot. But I've got roughly 3 little topics to talk about here this evening. And we'll talk about that, but I'm not going to dig into anything in like super deep way. But I'm going to show you a couple of little things. And if any of this wets your whistle and you go, wow, I'd like to learn more about that, talk to Pat. We can get stuff set up offline. We can come back later for a different thing. We can do deeper dives on things that you want to talk about if you just want to see what is this Suse thing turned into, we'll try to talk about that, and that's kind of where we're at. So I'll turn it over to Colin.
So I'm Colin Griffin. I work for Crumware. We're a software development consultancy out of Columbia. I didn't realize y'all were linked and associated with the Colo Linux Users Group, so I've sent a request. Somebody please grant it so I can join that group as well. So we're here in association with Suse because we have been developing software on containers and Kubernetes for the past, I guess, for 3 or 4 years in Kubernetes and 5 or 6 years in containers. So we really started, the company really started right around the time that containers were being popularized. And what we do is we help people actually adopt new technologies and methodologies, and we do a ton of work around developing cloud-native software that's cloud provider agnostic. And we started our journey with Rancher about 4 years ago in Rancher 1 because we needed a better way to manage our containers in an operational environment. And as Rancher moved into Kubernetes with version 2, and we needed better scaling and broader control, we've moved along with Rancher 2. And that's how we got started with Suse, because Suse acquired Rancher and has thrown a ton of resources behind it. And I'm really impressed with just the overall product direction of Suse lately. And I've had a chance to meet a lot of folks from Suse. And there's a lot of energy internally and a lot of the right folks. They're pulling out a lot of old Red Hatters from when Red Hat was cool, and it's fun to see that evolution take place. But I'm really happy to be involved and be a partner with Suse.
Very good.
Well, Dwayne, if you want to go ahead.
Sure, let me dig into Jitsi here and share my screen. And I don't want to kill you with slideware. One thing, please, there we go. There it goes. It caught up. Great. Okay, so here we are. So this is super, super interactive. Stop, yell at me, throw things at me, whatever you need to do, because I don't want to just talk. That would be just silly. So it's much more fun if it's a conversation than it is if it's just me whacking away. So anyway, yeah, we bought Rancher back in late 2020. And I'll tell you, I joined Suse in early 2018. Suse was desperately trying to figure out how to wrap their arms around this whole containerization thing. And they made some good strides in some areas, but they never could seem to put the whole thing together. And it became apparent after Suse had gotten purchased by this private equity firm called EQT, that EQT was pumping some money back into the company and was like, okay, what do you want to be? And we knew what we wanted to be, and the best way to get there was buying Rancher. And we went into that process and bought Rancher and promptly killed off all of our containerization products. The ones that we had been trying to do, we just slid those customers over into Rancher because it made such a good fit. Now, there was probably maybe one mistake in that. There was a side thing that got killed that probably should not have gotten killed, and probably something that got shunted off on a side railing that shouldn't have been, but it's coming back. So that we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's another area that we can dig into. But the whole idea behind Rancher is really, how do you deal? I mean, if you're dealing with Kubernetes, and I've got one cluster, I can deal with one cluster. I can kube control that. That's no problem. I can deal with that. If I've got two clusters, I'm probably okay. It's when I've got 30 clusters, or I've got 50 clusters, or I've got 100 clusters. What do I do about that? And trying to come up with a way of actually having a set of properties that define everything in my environment, from RBAC to single sign-on to all those kinds of pieces. That's what Rancher really brings to the party. I mean, Rancher is not interesting if I'm running one cluster. Well, it is actually, because you can go grab the open source version of it, and it's the best dashboard in the world for running a single cluster. And if that's all you're doing, you probably could just get the open source thing and off you running. But for folks that are actually building cloud native environments, and you're building and you're trying to containerize your systems, and I've got to have this in a supported fashion, that's where Suse Rancher comes in, because we provide that support, we provide the services behind that to be able to support you as you move into this containerized world. And that's where we kind of get into this. So that's basically Rancher in a nutshell. Now, one thing with Suse, and I'll back up on this for a minute. And I worked for lots of different companies. I used to work for Sun. I worked for an e-commerce company for a while that made software in that space. I worked for Steelite Technology, as I mentioned before, so I came out of that space too. And then I worked for Fusion.io and at SanDisk and for Western Digital. So I worked in the storage space for a while. And one of the things that I really had to grasp when I came to work for Suse, I first started using Suse software back in 2001. It was the first time I ever did. Actually, it was in 2000. I take that back. It was in 2000. So I had been dealing with this for years, but one of the things that I had to really kind of get behind my head when I came into Suse has no intellectual property. we don't have any intellectual property. Everything we have is open source. So everything we've got, you can go grab and use it. And that goes for, it's not, it didn't used to be quite that way. Today, it really is that way. Everything we have is open source. So you can go grab OpenSUSE Elite today. 15.4 just got released in the last few days. That is binary compatible with SLAS. It is exactly the same source. The only thing it changes on it is the decorations. So it is completely the same as our SUSE Linux Enterprise product. So there is no difference. So where our competitor in Raleigh was going in the other direction and getting rid of their open source version of their enterprise software, we were going in the exactly opposite direction and making sure that ours was exactly compatible. You can actually run a script and change your OpenSUSE Leap into SLAS. It's that simple. So there is actually a migration path that if you're running on OpenSUSE Leap, you can turn that into SLAS and put it under support. So we're happy to let folks do that if you need to. So you can go run as much OpenSUSE Leap as you want. We're perfectly happy with that. You can go grab Rancher. We don't have a version of these products that is, we don't have a version of these products that are different. They are the exact same products that we have that we sell support on are the ones that are open source. So that's something I know when we get new sales reps in and new SEs come in and I try to gently correct people because they go in and say, well, how many licenses do these folks need? They don't need any licenses at all because it's all open source. They can use it all they want. What we sell is support. That's all we sell. The only thing we sell is support and services. So that's the only way I keep food on my table and shoes on my kids' clothes, all that kind of stuff. That's how we pay for this stuff. Is we sell support and we sell services. So we're happy to be operating in that environment, but everything we got is free and open source. So you can go grab it and use it. But we know that lots of customers out there need support. They need to have somebody they can call when something gets wrapped around an axle at 2 in the morning. I mean, that's why we're there. We're that insurance policy to help you get through that when things get rough. And when you have a question, and when I've got to get something deployed by this Friday because I've got deadlines to hit and we're having an issue, that's where you could call our folks. And we have a range of support products from just standard support. We have priority support. We even have premium support. So premium support is we can actually, it's almost like we're putting a support person on your team. We have that ability to do that. We have a platinum support engineers that actually work and they work for you basically full time. And so they're part of your team. And it's basically whatever you want to pay for. We can provide that. So anyway, that's SUSE in a nutshell, and I probably spent way too much time on that. But again, this is the sort of the enterprise container management stack. SUSE Rancher is basically that third level in there. Basically, the idea is Rancher can manage any Kubernetes. And we have our own Kubernetes distributions. We have RKE, which is the Rancher Kubernetes engine. We also have something called RKE2, which has been up until this time called RKE for government, or Kubernetes for government. These are actually evolved into 2 separate products. And then we have this other interesting thing here called K3S. K3S is a very lightweight Kubernetes distribution. Runs really nicely on things like Raspberry Pis. We're going to talk about something else here in a minute that it actually has morphed into, which is also fairly interesting. But that's the whole idea. But this runs on any Linux platform you want to run it on. If you want to run this on Ubuntu, well, we're okay with that. If you want to run it on SLAS, we would love to sell you a SLAS subscription for you to run your Rancher on or your RKE nodes on. That'd be fine too. But we know that that's not the world that folks may want to run Red Hat, they may want to run Ubuntu, and that's okay. We're happy to let that go on. We also know that there are other Kubernetes distributions out there that folks want to run on. They want to run on EKS, they want to run on AKS. That's fine too. We're super fine with that as well. So we can fit into any kind of those models that you have. Rancher really is interesting especially when you, like I said, if you've got lots of Kubernetes clusters that you're trying to chase after, but at the same time, it's also really interesting if you're in a hybrid model where you've got things that are in the cloud and on-prem. That's what we're really shine at, is when you've got situations like that I've got to take care of these clusters in such a way that I deal with the on-prem ones the same way I deal with the the cloud ones, and having that sort of model. So anyway, I'm going to shut up about Rancher here for a minute. One more slide. I'm sorry. I'm going to show you that all the stuff you see on this slide here are things that are supported by Rancher. Everything that's under the green column are things that we have an SLA on. So we take an SLA. If you want to run Istio, we support Istio. So if you want to deploy Istio into your clusters, we can do that for you. And when you have a problem with Istio and you have a question, we take those questions and we work along that area. Everything that's under the orange, we integrate into Rancher and we make sure it works well with Rancher, but we don't take an SLA on those things. So if you need, if you've got stuff that's going on with, say, Splunk or Kong or Jenkins or things like that, and they're really important to your environment, you may want to get a support contract from those guys to help you with that. But we make sure that those things work with Rancher and work with RKE and can be deployed easily with Rancher and managed with Rancher. So that's kind of the delineation between these two things. I was going to just barely mention about Harvester. Harvester is another product that we popped in here recently. This Harvester is, and again, this was in response to a product that we killed off in 2019, which was OpenStack. We had an OpenStack distribution at one time, and we just got to the point was like, this thing is just too darn complicated for the world to deal with. And we walked away from that. But we knew that there was a world there that needed a product like that. And that's what Harvester has turned into, is basically Harvester is the ability to run virtual machines on a Kubernetes cluster. So this is really important for folks that are running in the edge, because if I've got an edge kind of deployment that I'm doing, I may have, let's say I'm doing retail, and I've got a retail distribution, and I've containerized the bulk of my applications, but I've got this one thing that I cannot get into a container. It's too hard. The guys that wrote it have left the company. They're not here anymore. Nobody really knows how it works, but it runs okay in a virtual machine. That's where this can come in and be useful, because I can run the bulk of my stack as containers on a cluster at site, but at the same time, I can still run that one virtual machine and run it on the same Kubernetes cluster that I'm running my other containers on. So that's kind of the beauty behind Harvester. And again, I just want to mention that briefly. Longhorn in the same way. Longhorn is the storage that actually is behind Harvester, because Harvester will basically let you build out a hyper-converged cluster that runs virtual machines. Well, you can also just use Longhorn by itself if you want hyper-converged storage for your Kubernetes clusters. This is another product that we have in that space. And again, not going to dig into the details of this. If you're interested later on, have questions, or would like to see a deeper dive on that, we'd love to do that.
You said Harvester was kind of a fork off of OpenStack. Is Longhorn off of some other?
Not that I'm aware of. This was a
Open source, yeah.
Yeah, it was complete. And again, these things are
Right.
completely open source projects.
Right.
So this was something that Rancher was working on before we acquired them. It had not been productized just yet. It was in the final stages. And then right after we bought them, it finally made it into product state. So
But again, it's open source and you can grab it and play with it. Last thing I want to talk about here is something called NewVector. And NewVector is another company we acquired. This was back last year. NewVector is really full cycle container security product. And the whole idea behind this is there's lots of security issues that people have out there running containers. Containers are very interesting, but they are becoming a bigger attack surface for the bad guys to try to get in. And so there's a number of products that have appeared in this world that allow you to do security on your containerized environment. And a lot of them look a lot like the second one here, which is basically being able to protect and scan things that are in my registry to make sure that they're not infected with anything before I deploy them. And this product that we bought called NewVector does that. It does that scanning and that CI/CD pipeline protection. It provides all those pieces, but it takes it one step further and goes into full runtime protection. Because one of the things that we found out, and again, when we went out and looked at these products and figured out who we would like to acquire to be in this family with us, is that the ability to actually do this runtime checking and provide this firewall style service to your Kubernetes cluster is really important. And the way that this happens is we actually have the ability to look at your traffic in your cluster and see what the normal patterns of usage are. And then you can go into what's called monitor mode. And basically then it will only click off saying, oh, this was an activity that has occurred in your cluster that's never happened before. Do you want to check this out further? And you can run in that mode for a while, but then you can go into full protection mode. So that basically when you go into protection mode, if somebody does something that's a little off kilter, it basically kills it and stops it. So that we don't need to know what a 0 day looks like exactly. We just know it's not your normal patterns of usage that are occurring, that we can actually detect those things and say, oh, this is not normal. This is not how XYZ company does their containers in this method. This behavior is aberrant and we're going to stop it. And so that's how we can protect against those kinds of things. So we look at being able to do the scanning and stuff in your registries as that's just table stakes basically for anything that's a security product. And we do that really well, but it's really this runtime piece that's really interesting. And so that's the whole idea behind NewVector and what that can do for you. The other interesting about NewVector, you say, well, okay, that's a Rancher product, right? And it's going to run on Rancher. It runs really well with Rancher. Also runs on OpenShift. It'll just run on just straight EKS or AKS or whatever you're running on. We don't care. If you want to run it on Tanzu, we're happy to take it. We'll sell you a support contract on that. We're happy to do that. So we're the open company. That's it. I got one more slight little topic here I was going to throw out. Anybody ever get this email?
Oh, yeah.
I don't think so.
Have you ever used Docker Desktop?
I tried it, it sucked.
Okay. So if you use Docker Desktop with a corporate email, you get this email. So the Docker company decided last summer that they were going to change their terms of service so that if you were using Docker Desktop in your corporate environment, you had so many developers, they were going to start charging you for it, that you could not use it for free anymore. So this caused great consternation inside of Suse because we had all kinds of people using Docker Desktop. And we had some really smart people that said, hey, we can come up with a different way of doing this. And so they took our K3S product, sunk it down, and we can now run it on a laptop. It's called Rancher Desktop. So that if you're interested in and have a need to run Kubernetes on your desktop machine, I urge you to go take a look at Rancher Desktop. We were talking before about Southeast Linux Fest. I did a whole presentation on Rancher Desktop at Southeast Linux Fest this year in Charlotte. What was that? That was last month. Yes.
Yeah.
So, we have that. I have it here on my laptop. I want to press on with the rest of the thing. If we want to come back and take a look at this later, glad to do that. I've got it running here. I can show you how it all works. So,
Cool.
thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. I want to give Brian a little chance to talk about how Purpose Financial is using Rancher, and then Dwayne, if you want to, if you're able to, maybe a few minutes on the Edge products.
Okay.
And maybe what Home Depot is doing with Edge, and then we can just go Q&A.
When I went to Purpose Financial a couple years ago, I came in as the DevOps guy because all they knew was they had like JBoss clusters, which is not really a thing with JBoss. They had ideas of AWS and things, so they needed a cloud expert and DevOps expert. And I took a look at, I was told to go play with containerization and Docker Swarm and all kinds of things. I was like, Docker Swarm's crap. Setting up Kubernetes from scratch, if you ever tried doing it, you set up Kubernetes, you set up your CNI, you set up your ingress. It's after about a week of cursing, you finally have something usable. Or you can go grab RKE and have a usable cluster in about 15 minutes. And you get Rancher on top of it with a really cool admin interface. That's where we started with Rancher, because we're a financials company, they said, okay, we have to have support for everything we do. Well, that's cool, Rancher's got that. Well, they support the Nginx ingress. Yep, they got that. Well, they support they got that. Well, so that's why we wound up with Rancher. We now have a number of clusters of on-prem. That was my first step, was take the developers and teach them how to containerize, get them into clusters on-prem and get our production happy, and then start moving to cloud, because containerization is, if you got a container, you can put it anywhere. So now we're moving to cloud, and we have a lot more in cloud in AWS than we have on-prem now. We have RKE clusters on-prem, EKS clusters in AWS. We're starting up some Fargate only EKS clusters. We played with Longhorn, but that was when we just talked about it was just first public and did not play happy. So we had to make a different solution, but playing with it since, it's really freaking cool. And there's still one bug preventing us from using it where we're using it though. Our marketing front end has to scale, because if anybody ever has to deal with marketing, they will send a mass email to 3 million customers and say, hey, click now. And they did that like 3 days after we went live with our this auto-scaling cluster. Our auto-scaling cluster was happy with that. We had no problems. But our online IS-based piece of crap, of course, fell to the ground. That's going to be in an automated cluster, in an auto-scaling cluster in a couple months. Not in IS. So that's where we are now. We've got, and next month, I'll do a presentation of one of the cool things I did. We are fully IAC Terraform, but doing that causes some complexities, and I'll do a presentation on admitting webhooks and handling some of the difficulties the IAC Terraform presented.
Good, thank you. Edge.
So Edge. So one of the areas that we're seeing, Suse has really broken itself into 3 pieces. And so we have enterprise Linux and all the stuff that goes around that. As you may know or may not know, the kind of diverse group here, but we're very dominant in the space of actually supporting SAP deployments. Yeah. And so we're pushing like 90% of that market. And more of that market is moving to Linux, as they have to actually be in the space of as they're moving to S/4HANA, they have to be running on Linux when they do that. And so there's a lot of folks out there still running on HPUX, and they're running on various Oracle distributions and Oracle databases, and there's still Adabase floating around it. There's still Sybase floating around there in that world. It's all kinds of stuff that's in that folks have been running their ERP systems on top of SAP, but they know they have to migrate. And so our enterprise Linux distribution is still really, really important. And so we've got and it's still growing. We've still got a very growing market there that we bring in new customers all the time. So it's still a very vibrant market. So that's one area that we're in. The second area that we're in is really enterprise container management, which is all wrapped around Rancher and all the pieces that Rancher can do in that world. But then you have this third pillar that's out there that's called Edge. And Edge is really morphing as we look at it. And you can back up and you can say, well, Suse has been involved in Edge really for a long time, because we have. I mean, anytime you go into a Kroger, basically all the POS systems in a Kroger are running Suse underneath them.
Sleep pods.
Yeah, sleep pods, exactly. And not only that, but we actually have our Suse manager for retail that's actually maintaining all those systems. So we have that area. So we've been dealing with that for a long time. But it's also, as we brought Rancher in, we knew that there was going to be a need in the Edge for Kubernetes. And that's where this whole idea behind K3S came from. It's I can have a really lightweight Kubernetes distribution that I could run at the Edge. And so that's where that second pillar is actually coming into play in the Edge as well. So you're going to see over time, as we're going to be morphing these things together, we're already starting to look at how do we manage the underlying OS that your Kubernetes is actually running on, because still you've got a Linux system out there typically, or Windows. We actually support Windows running Rancher on top of running RKE2. Let me make sure I get that right. It's RKE2 can actually run on top of Windows. So we actually have a version of that if you've got Windows-based containers, we can deal with those as well. So we have that ability, but still the vast majority of stuff out there is still Linux. So how do I manage all these Linuxes out at the Edge? What if they're all Ubuntu? Well, Suse Manager can do that, because we actually can. We don't care what Linux you're running on. We can actually support Red Hat. We can support, of course, SLES. We can support Ubuntu. We can support still CentOS. If you're still running CentOS, we can still, if you need to do patch management and all those kind of things on that, we can do that. So you're going to see this happen over time. So we actually have a general manager that's actually in charge of Edge at Suse. His name is Keith Basil. Keith is really great at this and has been doing it a while. He came out of Rancher. And so this is our third focus. In the markets that we're in is the Edge. So you're going to see more and more of this. We're getting some really, really cool Edge customers that are coming into play now. One that Pat mentioned here just a minute ago was Home Depot. So that's one that just closed for us. I've been involved in a couple of others, which is Carnival Cruise Lines. But basically, every ship is an edge deployment. So we're completely across the Princess line now. We're moving into some of the other lines. We've got another project that's just about ready to close that's based out of Italy. And again, this is an area that also continues to grow. So and then I'm also just involved in two other ones that are. I can't say that they're closed yet, so I won't talk about those yet, but those are very close. That are big edge deployments as well. So is that okay?
Yeah. Colin, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we go into Q&A?
No, I think Q&A would be good. I wish we had a chance to go into the underpinnings of this stuff because this Rancher is pretty awesome. The one thing I would say about Rancher, and it just goes back to like, I have to explain this to people a lot. And when we get into sales conversations or teach developers about this stuff, it's really not a license play for Suse. This stuff really is open source. There is no like feature gating that they're doing. You just can download and adopt the open source project, and they have a great community. And that's how we got started with Rancher as well. All of our environments in production, we don't have support plans for, sorry.
You are the.
Yeah. But we wish we did. We wish we could invest in that. But it's been a great product for us. But one of the things that I like to talk about a lot, and we can dig into it if it's of interest to the Q&A, but there's a new type of architecture that we teach to developers these days with regards to the flexibility that we get in Kubernetes and being able to deploy workloads alongside of each other. We have a new kind of technique or form of real application blacksmithing that we can do, where you can pick and choose and say, I want to deploy an Elasticsearch instance, a Spark or Hadoop instance, and a message bus with NATs, and a Redis instance, and all this stuff alongside of our applications in the same namespace with local access between these containers. And it really, from a software development standpoint, it simplifies our development process. We don't need to go to a bunch of different services or stand up a bunch of different things and deal with IAM roles. We can kind of treat the cluster like it's our local machine. And we actually use NewVector as a demo and a tool to provide some education there, because NewVector, like some of the other products, can be deployed with Helm and can be deployed alongside your application. It doesn't need to be something deployed with like Salt or Ansible onto your physical infrastructure. It can get deployed into your namespaces and operate that way and still give you security. And so I'd encourage people to just try, just adopt Rancher, get an RKE cluster rolling, get that, just install it on your own and go point and click and install these applications from their catalog. Their Helm installations, go find something on Bitnami and just deploy Helm locally. And it really will change your mindset with regards to how easy it is to deploy somebody else's applications into your stack now.
That's kind of what we did. I mean, we went and played with Rancher, had it running, said, okay, let's get support. And they said, yep, you got support now. All right, now what? You need us to read? No, you're good. We'll support you. When Suse bought them, Suse generated support keys. What do we do with this? I don't know. Don't worry about it. You're supported.
Yeah. When we get developers into these environments, you can choose, you can run whatever, CI/CD that you want to run, whether it's Jenkins or, a self-hosted GitLab or, whatever the heck you're trying to run. It doesn't really matter. And we have to shake developers out of that mentality. They say, well, what about running Redis here? I say, I don't know, go fucking try it. Just in Helm install it, just deploy the container. And it makes things a lot easier. And from an IT admin standpoint, I might define a cluster and then define a namespace, give somebody 4 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM and say, go have at it. And I know that they have their nice little sandbox and they can deploy whatever they want. They might have to ask me for roles if they want to deploy ingress or do something there. But
Well, I tell you, before we get to any questions, could you show us a little demo right quick?
Yeah.
What you're referring to, the developer's environment?
yeah, absolutely. I can. Yeah, I'm already connected on Jitsi. One of the things that I do, I'll just deploy NewVector on my local machine. That's super easy. I can show Rancher Desktop and I can deploy a NewVector instance.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a kind of underwhelming because
Click the button.
that's what my wife likes to say. But yeah, let me give that a shot. Sorry, is that not appropriate?
We have another project that's part of that's part of Suse's Linux, Enterprise Linux, is called live patching. And this ability to patch your kernel while it's running. And so you don't have to actually reboot while you're doing this. And I know I got called in on somebody yesterday with one, can you do a demo on live patching? And I go, I've never seen a demo on live patching that is even remotely interesting. It's a freaking patch. What? I said, I'm going to try to talk about live patching and how it works rather than try to give you some contrived demo on this feature.
Let's see. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
You might want to make it
Yeah,
larger.
I'm going to zoom here. Yeah.
Bobby can.
There we go. So Lenovo laptops are shipping with Ryzen processors and 4K monitors. So go get yourself a nice ThinkPad.
So certainly be sure to make the text much larger.
Yeah.
I mean, because for recording.
Oh shoot! It's large on. It's full screen on mine.
Oh,
right now.
well, that's the problem.
It's delayed. Well, we'll
There
watch.
comes-
We'll watch Jitsi catch up here.
Oh,
Holy moly!
There we go. It's coming.
All right, cool. All right. So I'm using kubectl here locally. So my local development environment, I use VS Code. I'm on Windows with WSL. I dropped Docker Desktop. I'm using Rancher Desktop, and it's not because I'm a Suse shill. The legit, and I can't zoom it in here. Let's go that way. I got to file a bug that Control Plus isn't working. The nice thing about Rancher Desktop is it lets me choose which container runtime I want to run. I choose to run Dockerd, which is the open source version of Docker on my local machine. So that's the OCI compliant, kind of non-need a Docker login version. And I choose to run that because there are still so many tutorials and things online that just leverage the Docker command that I don't want to retrain my brain every time I look at a new tutorial or a new reference. So I leverage Dockerd locally, and that's got all the nice like build-x stuff built in. It also gives me a nice way to look at port forwarding, view my images. It does all the nice things that Docker Desktop would. And it also, if I remember, they also have a way to, and I don't have it selected on my local instance, but you can run a light version of Rancher on your local machine. You can, if you want, deploy a full version of Rancher in a single node instance on your local machine as well.
And I have that. That was the first thing that I did once I installed Rancher Desktop. I said, well, what can I do with this thing? Well, let me see if I can install Rancher on it. And lo and behold, yeah, it was not hard.
So I've got several clusters running. I'm waiting for Jitsi to catch up here. I'm assuming my audio is delayed probably too.
You just asked if your audio was delayed for timing.
Yeah.
Like screen share is just delayed.
Okay, there we go. So we can see that I have 4 different clusters here that I have in my kube context. So I switch in between those at any given time. Dev Needies is one of my sandbox clusters. It's just a tongue-in-cheek play on Kubernetes, right? And sorry, I was trained to say needies by a Google engineer, so I'm going to blame them for how cringe I sound when I say Kubernetes because it's a habit. Kubernetes, sorry. Needies is the Greek word. Anyway, so on Rancher Desktop, so I'm connected to Rancher Desktop locally, so that is a local Kubernetes instance. If I do kubectl get all, it's going to show stuff that's in the default namespace. If I want to do all namespaces, so I have a full instance here of Kubernetes with traffic pre-installed as well. The room will just catch up, but otherwise I'll keep chatting. Let's see.
Delay. It says live at the top. I think it's.
Do you want to, if you disconnect, will that help my internet speed?
I mean, there's.
Just so they can bleep you out in case you say it better.
Is that your power or is that Ethernet? That's your power.
This is power.
All right.
Okay, I'm out.
Okay, I'm gonna put a link in chat also for an easy guide for this if you want to do this locally. Let's see. All right, so this is a remote instance of Rancher. Let me get back to my thing here.
That seemed to fix the delay.
Oh, nice.
That was me.
Yeah, it was. Sorry. All right. Sorry, people on the call. So is anyone familiar with Helm? Have you guys used Helm yet? So Helm is essentially, they call it the package manager for Kubernetes. It's a templating engine. So you can think of it like a local version of, almost a local version of Terraform, except you're not deploying infrastructure, you're deploying workloads, if that makes sense. And it's fully integrated with Kubernetes. So I'll create templates in Kubernetes that have that allow for variable insertion in my resource definitions, so that I can do things like pass in a variable that provides a prefix for my ingress, or specify that I want to enable or disable persistent storage, or any number of things there. I encourage folks to check out Bitnami, Helm, Catalog. Delay's back.
No, it wasn't me. Interesting fact, too, the guy who created Helm, Matt Farina, also is the guy who created Rancher Desktop. So
I didn't know he created that.
he did.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
I'm gonna fanboy a little bit then next time I see him. Wow. Why is it so slow? I'm on a totally different, there we go. Blame Jitsi. So you can see in Bitnami's Helm catalog that there's all kinds of workloads you might be used to running locally, even CRMs, but other open source projects. You can run a simple Helm install command, and you can pass variables into your command to enable all kinds of different portions or tools, or integrate the application with the rest of your stack. That's just a journey you need to go down. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to follow the blog that I have here that goes through some of the steps. So NuVector is essentially a collection of different containers that interoperate together and perform specific functions loosely, like a microservices architecture or an operator architecture. I talk a little bit about that in the walkthrough. But the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a repository for my NuVector Helm chart. So an open source, a lot of these are deployed into GitHub projects. Let's see, so I'm going to do a Helm repo add. So NuVector, Helm tells me that NuVector already exists because I've added it before, but I don't have it deployed into any namespace locally. So I just want to check to make sure I haven't deployed it. So I'm going to list all of the applications that I've installed with Helm. So Traffic, we'll see, is installed already, but that's the only application I have deployed locally. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to check to make sure I have an up-to-date version of the NuVector catalog on my local machine. Let's see. Catch up.
It's almost like when you go to the shell, it gets slow.
Yeah, it gets a little.
Right.
But like when you go to your browser, it speeds right back up.
Yeah, I wonder why. Must be a security thing. So I've got version 5 on here. They're actually on version 5.01, but that's okay. Now, what I'm going to do to install this locally is I'm going to use a Helm install command, or actually a shortcut, which is a Helm upgrade, and if it doesn't exist, install it command. I'm going to specify the repository and then specify the chart, and then the version as well, and the namespace that I want to deploy this into. And that's literally all that I'm going to do. So when we write custom software, we write it with Helm charts so that we can easily deploy it. This especially comes in handy when you have hybrid architectures. One we did recently was for an IoT company. They needed customers to be able to deploy portions of their stack on-premise into a private environment, but still have connectivity back to their SaaS solution. So the self-deployable on-premise, like their enterprise version, is a Helm chart that someone can deploy to any flavor of Linux that they want. We obviously recommend using Rancher to manage that, but they don't have to. So here we've deployed NuVector. I'm going to check to see.
This is a shell.
Is it a shell or is it a VM? Or a,
So it's, I guess, technically
It's
hybrid.
WSL.
WSL?
Yeah, it's just WSL.
What the hell are we doing there? That's weird.
It seems like it's WSL.
It's really, it works on my machine. So we can,
Can you
yeah.
maybe pop between when it, and it'll refresh faster?
Let's see. I'm over on my browser right now. Nope.
Drax.
All right.
You'd think that.
We'll just deal with it.
The text would actually update faster than the browser.
Yeah, it's okay right now. So we'll actually see here. I've gotten all the resources in my namespace, and in under 30 seconds, we've already deployed all of the workloads for NewVector. So I have NewVector up and running on my local machine, and it's doing all of the nice things that NewVector does. It doesn't require any other configuration other than that. If you're evaluating, then you don't need to worry about persistent storage, but otherwise you can look at the guides and see the way to enable persistent storage if you have a storage driver. And then what I'm going to do, in Kubernetes, there's the concept of a port forward. And the nice thing here, if I'm in a remote cluster, connected to a remote cluster, I'll create a port forward to my local machine so that I can connect to that instance and to a specific service without creating an ingress. So it securely proxies that connection to my local machine so that I can try things out as if it's securely part of that infrastructure. To me, that's incredibly important because we all have dealt with the pain in the ass that is setting up ingress, right? Or making something accessible after we've deployed it.
I said something like that a minute ago.
Yeah. So I don't have to do that from my local machine, but I can connect to a different cluster that I have this running, and there it catches up. And I can use this kubectl port forward command and proxy to my local connection at port 8443. So I'm just going to run localhost, HTTPS, localhost 8443 on my local machine. Don't let me down.
Did you pray to the demo gods?
I didn't pray to the demo gods. So we'll audible, and what we'll do is I'll do kubectl config set context from cloud. This is one that I checked before I joined. Now use context. Why do I always forget that? And then I'm going to run my port forward command. Let's see, it's actually in here. There we go.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I think the shell was just a red herring. I think it just happened to speed up and slow down at those points.
So here's NewVector now deployed as it loads on the screen here. There we go. So we see that port forward kick in, and then here's NewVector loading, and I go into NewVector. One of the cool things about NewVector is if somebody doesn't have experience with security and doesn't understand what compliance frameworks look like, you can show them in NewVector. So here, out of the box, I deployed this yesterday into this cluster. The default password and username is admin, go figure.
Good for a security project.
Yeah, and it does recommend you should change this password.
That's a really good recommendation.
Sorry, we're waiting for the screen to catch up, y'all. There it goes.
Can't blame WSL either.
Nope.
No, I think that was just chance. It happened to be fast.
Yep, there we go. So we'll see that I already have scores and risks. I'm listing different services and pods and things that are in my cluster here. I do have a couple of production workloads running here, including our website. So hack me, go for it. One of the cool things, if I do a quick little tour, so you can deploy this into your cluster and then use this to potentially evaluate and then lock down your software workloads. If I look at network activity, so just instantly by evaluating the Kubernetes configuration and all the resources, it's going to build a network map for me. So here it should populate. The screen catches up, and I've got a lot of stuff. There we go. So there are the workloads in this cluster. So now I can get some nice point and click visibility on these different workloads. We can see that Cert Manager is running here. I can get it to click. Let's see. So we can monitor, we can protect, we can quarantine, we can do all kinds of nice things on these workloads. We can observe traffic that's headed into these workloads, both egress and ingress. And the screen is delayed. Now, if I want to switch over to policy, there we go, that's going to click. Go for it, guys. Go for it. There we go. Nice menu options. Okay. If we want to go over to policies, we can create admissions controls and rules. We can create network rules. And there's a lot that are already created that let me observe. What can I kill on here to make this thing faster?
I don't think it's you.
Yeah,
I think it's just pretty obvious.
yeah, I think it's Gypsy.
Are we waiting on it to catch up? What's the resource request of Vector? Is it as hefty as like a?
It's not very big.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
pretty
Yeah, I run it on my local machine alongside other things. I'll turn it off and turn it on, but it's pretty,
I've got Prometheus, Istio, all kinds of things that are
well, it'll piggyback on most of that.
sweet.
Yeah. That's another nice thing like with Prometheus, right? Is if you use Helm charts, you can configure it to reuse an existing Prometheus instance and don't have to deploy a new Prometheus for everything. All right, so it caught up. So you see here some nice network rules. If we want to look at security risks, this is big for the financial space, right? We want MITRE attack framework. We want NIST compliance, all kinds of different compliance frameworks. Here I have recommended remediations. There's things that are exposed out to the internet that I need to dismiss because they're intentional. If we look at compliance profile, here's where the real fun happens, where we've got PCI compliance, GDPR, HIPAA, and NIST out of the box. And MITRE attack is in there somewhere. But that's super beneficial to have. So again, like around trying to eliminate the excuses of your developers. If somebody complains that they don't know enough about security to lock something down and you're already in Kubernetes, just deploy new Vector open source for free into the namespace or into your cluster alongside those workloads and slap them on the back of the head and make them learn it. So I guess the summation is it took me about 30 seconds to install this and then start poking around and learning about things. And that really is the power of using Helm and Kubernetes once you have your environments set up. It is important to go back and make sure you have access control properly configured and enabled. But one thing that we do, again, back to the software development side, is GitHub single sign-on is supported out of the box for Rancher as well. And that's how we do most of our access controls internally, is let our developers just use their GitHub logins and jump into infrastructure without having to touch AWS or Azure or an on-premise environment and having to figure that stuff out.
Our Rancher Cloud login is, all right, you're using our Azure AD.
Yep.
You do that. Okay.
Yep. Cool. So thanks for letting me show that off.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Brian. Any questions from anyone on the line or anyone here?
So Helm is basically, it almost seems like it's like Docker run, where it's downloading and running, but more for Kubernetes instead of just a single container.
So what Helm?
More like what kubectl is.
Yeah,
Helm is
so-
more like what's the Docker?
It's like Docker Compose,
Compose,
almost.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah, so what Helm would do is Helm, if you've started with Kubernetes and done vanilla Kubernetes and had to do kubectl apply, right, and to put an ingress in there and put a deployment in there and like define all these different resources and then they eventually all work together, Helm will do all of that for you.
Okay.
So you can do a Helm install and you can do a dry run and actually just print out those Kubernetes resources and then manually apply those if you wanted to. But Helm also gives you additional things like lifecycle controls and automated testing built in and automated rollbacks and upgrades, and does a lot of that quality of life stuff that we just don't get by deploying a workload. One of the journeys that gets taken a lot when people are migrating into Kubernetes is you containerize something, you figure out how to run it locally with Docker Compose. Some admin creates a Kubernetes environment, you manually deploy and point and click or create workloads that are running on Kubernetes. And then when you have to do your first rollout, your first deployment, you're screwed. And you can't figure out, I have to delete this workload and then maybe it'll upgrade, and you have to figure some of those things out. What we'll often do is migrate somebody into Helm and then do their next deployment using Helm and get them into that rollout strategy, and then implement things like the end-to-end testing and the automatic rollback if a deployment fails and those tests fail, and some of those other things there. It's super handy and useful. The other analog that is really popular right now is Customize with a K, and they both kind of compete with each other a little bit.
Good. Anything else? All right. I will make sure Jace has my email, Colin's email, and Dwayne's email to post to the group. If you guys want to reach out for anything, please let us know. We would love to help you. If you all know